Welcome everyone, both here and also in the ether. I think both in Annapolis. I think there are going to be students, faculty, staff, and probably people from all around that are watching this, desperate to hear about the Lord of the Rings. My name is Ned Walpin. I'm the Associate Dean for Graduate Programs here in Santa Fe. Let me just mention a few things before we start. The first is that next week there is a lecture coming from Annapolis, but will be streamed also. It's at 7:30 in Annapolis and 5:30 Mountain Time. It's a lecture by Dr. Angel Parham. She's a professor of sociology at Loyola University in New Orleans. And the essay is on civic friendship in fractured times, Aristotelian insight of Anna Julia Cooper and Martin Luther King Jr. A couple of things I just want to mention before, I love having these two guys right here. Before we start, one is that the lighting for people who are remote, and actually maybe for the people who are here, is not perfect because we have yet to get our spotlighting back up due to repairs and upgrades. So we recognize that, and I apologize. Secondly, if after the lecture, we're going to have a question period, if people in the audience here can come up, and there is a hockey puck over by this table, and if you can just stand and ask your question there so it can be heard by people who are remote. And likewise, people who are on the Zoom meeting, if they can type into the question and answer function in Zoom, then we will have a trusty reader read it out loud into that mic, and then these guys can respond to it, or punt it from one person to the other. So I do want to mention, as by way of introduction, my mother tried to get me to read Lord of the Rings repeatedly when I was growing up, and she was utterly unsuccessful. So this is my time of penance. I look forward to hearing about why I made a grievous error when I was young, and maybe should correct that now. So without further ado, I want to introduce and welcome Krishnan Venkatesh and Richard McCombs. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walpin. I hope this discussion is not going to feel like penance. Except perhaps for Mr. Walpin. But how this came about was that Mr. McCombs and I have been talking for a few years about Lord of the Rings in passing. He is much more of a Tolkien scholar than I am. I am not a Tolkien geek. I don't know the overall mythology very well, but I'm interested in this as literature. So I'm just going to jump right in. There's a lot to talk about, and we could talk for several hours, and then the question period could be several hours, but we won't do that. But so we're probably just going to talk about a couple of things in the book that open up other things in the book. The way I would see it is that you only need to crack an egg in one place, right? If you're skillful. So we find that in what we talk about, we open up other questions, other areas of the book. That's great. And if we succeed in sending you back to reread, or in Mr. Walpin's case to read, then I think that would be a good discussion. So I'm just going to jump right in and start the conversation where Mr. McCombs and I left off. Namely, what was it that first moved you about Lord of the Rings when you first read it, and how has that changed?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question, and my suspicion is that it's close to the same thing. So I'm, by the way, not a Tolkien scholar really, but I do love it and have read it many times. And I reread it because it moves me so much. So I think that's a really important question. Probably when I was 11 and read it for the first time, one of the more important things for me was its treatment of heroism. I loved the heroes and was inspired by them. But I think even then, that was not what was most important to me, and it's less important now than it was then. I think the book has a mythic, poetic, noble, beautiful quality that creates an ambiance that I love to dwell in. And I find it incredibly moving, maybe because I read it when I was so young, but more moving than anything else I've read, even though I wouldn't say it's the best thing that I've read at all. I think, though, probably what matters more to me is the sadness of the book. It's one of the saddest books I think I've read and enjoyed, and somehow the sadness in it is sublime or sweet, and the cause or source of the sadness is lost grandeur or lost splendor or lost great civilizations. And I think that sense of loss creates in many readers and in me something that's something like Platonic eros in the Phaedrus and in the Symposium, a longing for some great thing that you're not very clear about. And then there's some curious mixture then of those two things. So the poetic nobility, the grandeur, the heroism creates a feeling of sublimity, and it's uplifting. And then that's counterbalanced by this sense of loss and this sweet sadness. And for a long time, that's probably most of my appreciation of The Lord of the Rings. I didn't read it because I thought it was mainly interesting or entertaining, though it is those things. And then 7 years ago, I started trying to write on Tolkien, and I discovered that Tolkien is deeper than I realized and more subtle than I realized, and that he bears a close reading like we give at St. John's to great books. It doesn't fall apart. I appreciated it more. And I think it would make an excellent preceptorial book. I think there's more there, more than enough. So Mr. Venkatesh and I thought we might talk at least initially some about heroism. So I thought some about that. And you might be surprised, but I think Tolkien is not really much of a lover of heroism. He admires it, so he's not a critic. He's not a cynic about it, but he is a severe critic of it. He thinks that it has limitations and dangers and excesses, problems. And his presentation of it, I think, is quite interesting. He downplays it most of the time. And if you're a young person eager to read something heroic, as I was when I was 11, the way he sets up the heroic scenes is often disappointing. They're anticlimaxes. And in the best, most heroic characters in the book, I think it's obvious that their heroism is subordinated to other things. It's not the most important thing about them. So I was going to direct us to a passage about Faramir. And I think Faramir is a kind of hero. He certainly has the stuff to be a hero. He's stern, brave, an excellent warrior, and he loves the city of Gondor greatly, so he would be willing to fight and sacrifice for it. But he doesn't care about heroism at all, as far as I can tell. He probably cares about it the least of any heroic character in the book, at least any heroic human being. So the passage that I'm going to direct us to is in the window on the west. And if you happen to have this edition, it's on page 671. So Frodo and Sam are in Faramir's power right now. And he probably could take the ring from Frodo if he wanted. He doesn't yet know Frodo has the ring, but he has shrewdly guessed that Frodo has some weapon made by the enemy. And he's aware that Frodo is very afraid. So I think that is the setup for this passage. So he knows Frodo's afraid, and he says, "But fear no more. I would not take this thing if it lay by the highway, not were Minas Tirith falling in ruin, and I alone could save her. So, using the weapon of the Dark Lord for her good and my glory. No, I do not wish for such triumphs, Frodo, son of Drogo." So you might think that that sounds like a boast. It sounds pretty exaggerated and extreme. I think it's pretty clear in the book that later events prove that what he says is exactly true, or 99% true. He doesn't see it by the roadside, but he has an opportunity to take it or to try to take it, and he doesn't seem even tempted by it. So what if he's not, and I'm not really sure that he's boasting either. So why does he say this? Why does he stress so much that he wouldn't take the ring? So now I'm going to read the next paragraph, which is a little longer. Well, there's a transition paragraph. So Frodo says, Faramir says, I don't wish for such triumphs. And Frodo responds, neither did the council, nor do I. I would have nothing to do with such matters.
He's lying, right?
You think
You
Frodo
think
is?
so? Yeah.
Well, I want to hear why you think so.
Okay, later. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. For myself, said Faramir, I would see the white tree in flower again in the courts of the kings, and the silver crown return, and Minas Tirith in peace, Minas Anor again as of old, full of light, high and fair, beautiful as a queen among other queens, not a mistress of many slaves, nay, not even a kind mistress of willing slaves. War must be, while we defend our lives against a destroyer who would devour all. But I do not love the bright sword for its sharpness, nor the arrow for its swiftness, nor the warrior for his glory. I love only that which they defend, the city of the men of Numenor, and I would have her loved for her memory, her ancientry, her beauty, and her present wisdom, not feared, save as men may fear the dignity of a man, old and wise. Now, I think the main point of this paragraph is that Faramir is saying what he does desire, what he does love. And the reason that he's doing that, I think, is that he is trying to be as convincing to Frodo as he possibly can be that he doesn't want to take the ring. And I myself find it incredibly believable. I think that someone who wanted the ring couldn't speak so eloquently about why he didn't want it. At least it would be difficult. Admittedly, there are great liars, but it would have to be a very, very clever liar. So I think he's trying to assuage Frodo's fear, and I'll talk about why in a minute. But I do want to go through this paragraph again and talk about most of it. So he says, I would see the white tree in flower again in the courts of the kings, and the silver crown return. So both of those are symbols of the ancient kings of Gondor. And it's interesting that Faramir is in line to become the ruler of Gondor, not its king, the steward of Gondor. And so he's saying, I don't want to rule. I'm not ambitious. I don't care about things like that. It would make me happier if the king returned. So then he says, Minas Tirith in peace. So that's the city as it's now named. And then he says, Minas Anor, again as of old. It's the same city, just the old name. Full of light, high and fair, beautiful as a queen among other queens. So he's moved by the beauty of the city. And I find it striking that he doesn't even want this city to have preeminence over other cities. He says a queen among other queens, doesn't make it special in any way. And for human beings, this was the greatest realm anyway. So he might have thought, oh, it used to be the greatest, so I wish it were the greatest again, but he's not even ambitious for his own city in that way. And then he says of the city, not a mistress of many slaves, not even a kind mistress of willing slaves. So he doesn't want empire, he doesn't want power for himself, and he doesn't want his own city to have great power. War must be while we defend our lives against a destroyer who would devour all. So he's admitting that war is a necessity. And then he might have just said, but I don't love war. But instead he says it in a poetic way. But I do not love the bright sword for its sharpness, nor the arrow for its swiftness, nor the warrior for his glory. So I'm not sure about this, but I think he's trying to say, I do have some poetic appreciation for what people love about war. War is not mere prose for me. But then he goes on to say, I love only that which they defend. So I'm not interested in war at all. It doesn't have much glamour for me. I love only what it defends. And I think he's more extreme or more pure on this than Tolkien. I think Tolkien does have some admiration for martial virtues and heroism. So Faramir maybe is a type that's a little bit different from Tolkien on this. And so he loves only the city which they defend, the city of the men of Numenor. And then it's interesting, he immediately goes on to say, I would have her loved. So he doesn't just say, I love her, but he wants to share that somehow. And he thinks maybe that it would be good for other people to love her for the right reasons. So I would have her loved for her memory. And I think he means her memory of her ancient glory and of her history. And then he says her ancientry, which I think is a kind of beautiful poetic word. He could have just said her ancientness or something. But it sounds, I think it's an example of Tolkien's good diction. Her beauty and her present wisdom. So he would like her to be wise now, and to be honored for that. It's striking that he doesn't mention justice or any obvious moral quality here. Probably he thinks that that's included in wisdom. Then he says, not feared, save as men may fear the dignity of a man, old and wise. So he has portrayed himself as an extremely peaceful man, and he doesn't even want his city to be feared. He wants it to be loved. And then he returns. He's talked about fear in every paragraph, and now he returns and he says, so fear me not. So he's telling Frodo, again, don't fear me. And then some of this won't make great sense out of context, but it's short. I do not ask you to tell me more. Frodo has been hiding things from him. I do not even ask you to tell me whether I now speak nearer the truth. But if you will trust me, it may be that I can advise you in your present quest, whatever that be, yes, and even aid you. And it's interesting here that, so I think that he doesn't want Frodo to fear him so that Frodo can be receptive to help from him, advice and aid. But I like it that Faramir is so modest here. He doesn't say, I'm sure I can help you or anything. He says, it may be that I could advise you and give you aid. So I think that that's a powerful passage that shows a man of great understanding who loves wisdom and art and beauty and sort of ancient tradition, and doesn't really care for war or glory or heroism.
Can I throw in an observation?
Please do, yeah.
With a passage that you read? So in that paragraph where he says, I would have her loved for her memory, her ancientry, her beauty, and her present wisdom. And it goes, period. Not feared. As if he's thinking, right? Not feared. Save as men may fear the dignity of a man, old and wise. And so he's qualifying his thoughts as he speaks, right? And so I find that line actually deeply moving. That he says, this is the way I want to be feared, right? For dignity and wisdom. And then after he says, fear me not, and he's, as Mr. McCombs says, he's marvelously tactful, that of all the heroes, he's the one who's most understated. And which is why he doesn't shine forth in movies. For example, you don't remember who played Faramir in the movie, right? But he does, so he's very understated because there's more going on in his mind. And his behavior with Frodo in this chapter is, I find, just a marvel of writing, because it's as if he's trying to speak to Frodo at a level that Frodo's trying to hide, right? So he's trying to address Frodo underneath his words. And so when he says, so fear me not, I do not ask you to tell me more. I do not even ask you to tell me whether I now speak nearer the mark. But if you will trust me, it may be that I can advise you in your present quest, whatever that be. Yes, and even aid you. Frodo made no answer. Right? And that itself is very moving. What's going on in Frodo? You know, there's a lot to unpack there. But Faramir, at a few pages later, he says this other thing to Frodo that also stuck in my mind in regard. This is on page 679 for those of you who have the big anniversary edition. So he says, yet now, if the Rohirrim are grown in some ways more like to us, enhanced in arts and gentleness, we too have become more like to them, and can scarce claim any longer the title high. So he's contrasting his people with a much more warlike people, right? And saying if they're becoming more gentle, we're becoming more warlike, and we can scarce claim any longer the title high with a capital H, right? We are become middlemen of the twilight, but with memory of other things. For as the Rohirrim do, we now love war and valor as things good in themselves, both a sport and an end. And though we still hold that a warrior should have more skills and knowledge than only the craft of weapons and slaying, we esteem a warrior nonetheless above men of other crafts. Such is the need of our days. So even was my brother Boromir, a man of prowess, and for that he was accounted the best man in Gondor, and very valiant indeed he was. No heir of Minas Tirith has for long years been so hardy in toil, so onward unto battle, or blown a mightier note on the great horn. Faramir sighed and fell silent for a while. So what he's just said is very moving to him, and I think what's moving is that, in a way, the plight of a civilization like his, like Gondor, is that when they are faced with a threat like Sauron, they have to become, in a way, like Sauron, you know, to become an efficient killing machine in order to fight efficient killing machines. That the effect. So one of the evils of Sauron, one aspect of Sauron's evil, is just by being what it is, it forces other human beings to become their lowest common denominator, in a way, you know. So now that even the high civilization like Gondor, they know that's what they live for. Mm-hmm. They know that's still in their memory, but they're now in this deep conflict, because now they have to emphasize the warrior part. And I think someone like Faramir is aware that the civilization is going. It's lost. The end for which they fight has disappeared.
Mm-hmm. By the way, you mentioned the movie, and I thought it was, if I remember right, I haven't watched it in so long, but if I'm not mistaken, maybe somebody in the audience knows, in the film, they have Faramir attempt to steal the ring, or at least he's tempted to steal the ring from Frodo. So it's as though it's hard in a film, at least that sort of film, to show the excellence and virtue and character of a man like this. And so to make it more interesting, they make him more like other people.
Yeah. That this particular chapter is the one in the Two Towers. It's called the Window on the West. You might read it. It's a wonderful chapter. But the conversation between Faramir and Frodo is peculiarly intimate, right? What they're saying on the surface is only part of what they're saying. So you really have to read between the lines for their reactions. And one of the reasons it's so moving is that I don't think anywhere else in the book you see a man and a hobbit talking so intimately, right? You know, so there's a way in which Frodo is capable of understanding some of Faramir's dilemma, but Faramir is also capable of understanding the kind of being that Frodo is.
Mm-hmm. And part of the reason, of course, that the conversation has so many undertones and unstated suggestions is that they're talking, at least at the beginning, in front of other people.
Yeah.
And Faramir is attempting to make a decision what to do with Frodo. He's in fact commanded by his father to slay everyone that he encounters there without leave. So Faramir, by not killing Frodo and Sam, is himself subject to death because he's broken the law, violated the command. So you can see their artfulness and their nuance when they're attempting to talk about something that they both know is really important and dangerous, but that they can't draw too near the main points.
Yeah, he's a statesman,
Mhm.
right? All the other leaders, I think all the other leaders, even the elvish ones, they what they say is what they mean. You know, there's no dancing around with words. There's no finessing with intentions.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. The thing that you said about the need to become more warlike if you have to fight other warriors, I thought that the very first paragraph that I started with had, I think an analogous point could be made about this. So if you're a reader of The Lord of the Rings, you're supposed to know that the ring cannot be used for good purposes. I think that's shown pretty convincingly in the book, but Faramir doesn't know that it's the ring, and he doesn't know, but he seems to realize that anything made by the Dark Lord would be dangerous to use. So I'm not sure, maybe he's thinking that in order, he's refusing to use greatly evil means in order to do something good. But it is pretty striking. Maybe it's even unbelievable that he's so near the mark here without actually knowing that it's the ring.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Why did you think Frodo was lying?
I think so when he says, I'll find the passage again.
671.
671. Yeah. So when he says, "I would have nothing to do with such matters,"
Mhm.
I mean, I think we already know that he's very conflicted. You know, so he's seen, you know, the fact that he's on the quest means that he's interested in such matters.
Do you think that it's false that on the whole he would rather not do it, but he feels that he's destined to do this and it would be ignoble to refuse?
I'm not sure. Yeah, I think part of my sense of Frodo as he develops is that, and maybe this isn't fully fledged here yet at this point, is that there's something about having the ring that makes him feel more alive.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that when he's bereft of it at the end, he feels that life is just paler. You know, so there's the ring brings a kind of intensity of engagement,
right,
that he hasn't had before. And I'm not sure, yeah, go ahead.
So I think I can see the evidence for that I learned from you that comes later.
Mm-hmm.
But besides his sorrow at being bereft of the ring, can you point to another place where maybe we can see that he is more alive because of the ring? Or just give a general argument?
Well, I just think his interest, the interest of the intensity of his interest in fulfilling the quest, and a kind of fascination with having the ring. I think the constant fascination with the ring
Mhm.
that he has makes him parallel to Gollum. In a way, you know, that they both understand each other's fascination.
Mhm.
But I think it's the fascination that belies, you know, I would have nothing to do with such matters, unless the fascination makes that sentence more complicated. Is that because he knows how fascinating it is, because he knows
Mhm.
what a hold it has, he knows better than Faramir could.
Okay,
Why one would not want to have anything to do with such matters.
right.
Mm.
That makes sense. And therefore he could have said, I would have had
Yeah,
nothing to do with such matters, but once he's borne the ring for a long time, then it has wormed its way into his consciousness and he can't
yeah,
be indifferent to it anymore.
yeah. One of the things that Mr. McCombs and I were talking about a couple of weeks ago, and this will relate back to Faramir, is the topic of sex in Lord of the Rings. And we thought of entitling this discussion "Sex in Lord of the Rings" in the hopes of a bigger audience. But and with a subtitle, "The Absence of." But so there's a romance coming up after this, and the romance is between Erwin and Faramir. And so I'm going to start a little bit by Erwin in a few minutes. But it connects, this is going to connect with the topic of heroism and what's moving about heroism. But so the sex in Lord of the Rings is an interesting topic, because one thing that I've noticed is there's an absence of physical details about bodies, like sweat. There's a lot of exertion, but there's no sweat. There are women, but there's nothing sexual about them. I mean, sometimes Tolkien's portraits of the noble women always strikes me as truly horrible. They're only beautiful with long hair, and they're stout of heart, or whatever, so very cardboard cutout, and there's nothing about them that would give any frisson. So the closest you get to sex is Sam's wife Rosie, so they have children, but the thought of sex never enters anyone's head thinking about Sam, right? So there's a strange absence of that. There's rain, and I think about Tolstoy in comparison. When there's rain in Tolstoy, there's mud. There's the smell of wet dog, right? There's horses smelling, and people get cold. So that features like that. When there's rain in Tolkien, you don't get any of that. There are no smells, and and rain is very fragrant. So this absence of bodily smells, of chemical attraction, this it's very striking, and I don't fault him for this, because in a way, if you had sex in the book, sex brings in like whole other level of confusions, like all the neuroses that go with sex, and the anxieties and the complex, messy thoughts. So sometimes you might want to focus on one set of confusions, kind of highlight one set of confusions by ignoring another set of confusions, and this, so the set of confusions here are confusions regarding heroism and good and evil and questions like that. But so put sex in the background, and now you can focus on these things. My one misgiving is that the heroism here seems so gendered, right? So it's hard to see how you can entirely disconnect it with sex. But that being said, it's done. Now, the character of Erwin has grown on me a lot over the years. The first time I read Lord of the Rings, I barely noticed her, but she is the one. She's the one who wants to be a man. She's in love with Aragorn, and she wants to be a male warrior, right? So there's a section of the book in which, if I may find it and read it, right? And so at that point, so Mary's the one that rescues her. Okay, so here's the thing. So Tolkien is writing this book, and one of the things that's going to happen is that Faramir and Erwin have to marry, right? So in the big trajectory of the book, that's what's going to happen. But so I'm thinking from the novelist's point of view, Erwin has been deeply in love with Aragorn. There's a way in which she is in love with Aragorn, but she also wants to be Aragorn. She wants what Aragorn has, which is that kind of epic, kingly, manly nobility, power, strength, prowess, right? So she wants those things, and yet at the same time she's in love with Aragorn. So this is like, I think, sort of very accurate, insightful view of Eros. Like, say that if you love someone, you also want everything that's theirs. Anyway, so you want to be like them. They inspire you for that. So then Tolkien's problem, the author's problem is going to be, how can I? So since that she's so driven by that love of Aragorn, how is it going to be possible for me to detach her from Aragorn and have her end up with Faramir at the end? You know, so is that going to take 200 pages, 300 pages? And in fact, it takes about 3, right? So now this is really important for me. Now let me grope around the book a little bit, because there are a couple of passages. Okay, my bookmarks all fell out. Okay, so when this is on page 867 in a section called the chapter called the Houses of Healing, when Aragorn as a healer has produced this herb Athelas that will cure the people who have been hurt in the war and by the and especially Erwin, who's unconscious right now. And so Aragorn and Erwin's brother Eoma and Gandalf are talking about the whole situation and what's happened. And Gandalf says something interesting to Eoma. So Eoma has not noticed what's been happening in his sister the whole time. He's been blind to Eowyn. And Gandalf says, "My lord, if your sister's love for you and her will, still bent to her duty, had not restrained her lips, you might have heard even such things as these escape them. But who knows what she spoke to the darkness alone in the bitter watches of the night?" So, but who knows what she spoke to the darkness alone in the bitter watches of the night, when all her life seemed shrinking and the walls of her bower closing in about her, a hutch to trammel some wild thing in. Right, so this is Gandalf trying to describe Eowyn's misery as somebody who was not allowed to be herself. Right, and it's got a hutch. So the roles that she's forced into is not the roles that she wanted, which was to be Aragorn. She didn't want the domestic role, and so Gandalf's description is so powerful. A hutch to trammel some wild thing in. Right, so she's described as a wild thing, untamed spirit in a way, and a hutch like a rabbit hutch, right? Kind of small thing. And trammel, a trammel is like a secondary net in a fishing net. You know, so if the fish get out through the holes of the net, they get caught in another net that's there. So this sense of like being doubly imprisoned, triply imprisoned, the hutch, and then the net and the trammel. You know, so Gandalf kind of gets that sense of imprisonment that Eowyn had. So then Eoma was silent and looked on his sister, and Aragorn then talks. And Aragorn, who's aware of Eowyn's love for him, but Aragorn loves someone else. He belongs to somebody else, right? So Aragorn has already been trying to turn her away from him, but he says, "I saw also what you saw, Eoma. Few other griefs amid the ill chances of this world have more bitterness and shame for a man's heart than to behold the love of a lady so fair and brave that cannot be returned. Sorrow and pity have followed me ever since I left her desperate in Dunharrow and rode to the paths of the dead, which she wanted to accompany him on. And no fear upon that way was so present as the fear of what might befall her. And yet, Eoma, I say to you that she loves you more truly than me. For you she loves and knows, like her brother. But in me, she loves only a shadow and a thought, a hope of glory and great deeds, and lands far from the fields of Rohan." Right, so Aragorn, I think, said something like maybe very insightful. I'm not sure about this, but he might have nailed it by saying, okay, so she doesn't. It's not me that she wants. It's some ideal projection that she's put on me. That's what she's in love with. It's not me, right? And so here you get the character of Erwin, right? So as she's recovering, she spends a little bit of time with Faramir. And there are a couple of conversations that I want to point out that in which Tolkien is at his most romantic. I wrote down the pages. Okay, I got the pages. Thank you. Yeah. So in a chapter called "The Stewart and the King," which is another marvel, it's one of those beautiful chapters that has a lot going on and says very well constructed and just beautifully organized. She and Faramir have two conversations, right? And the first conversation, she says, okay, so they know that the big conflict, the big battle is happening somewhere else, and they're waiting for the results. She says, and there's a lot of context that I don't have time to fill in. He says, "What do you look for, Erwin?" said Faramir. "Does not the black gate lie yonder?" said she. "Is the gate tomorrow? And must he not now be come thither? It is 7 days since he rode away." She's talking about Aragorn, right? So she's imagining her heart is with Aragorn right now. 7 days, said Faramir. "But think not ill of me if I say to you, they have brought me both a joy and a pain that I never thought to know. Joy to see you, but pain, because now the fear and doubt of this evil time are grown dark indeed. Eowyn, I would not have this world end now, or lose so soon what I have found." Right? So Faramir is in love with her. She is completely indifferent to him at this point, it seems. "Lose what you have found, Lord?" she answered. But she looked at him gravely, and her eyes were kind. So does she understand what he's saying? I think at this point that she's getting a glimmering of what he's saying. Because "I know not what in these days you have found that you could lose. But come, my friend, let us not speak of it." My friend, right? Right? "But come, my friend, let us not speak of it. Let us not speak at all. I stand upon some dreadful brink, and it is utterly dark in the abyss before my feet. But whether there is any light behind me, I cannot tell, for I cannot turn yet. I wait for some stroke of doom." Right, so what is she thinking? So she's all her life, all her hopes are hinged on Aragorn, whom she, I think, knows that she can't have. But there's a way when she's at a turning point in her life. She knows that if she can't have what she's dreamt of, if her dreams are now permanently unattainable to her, there's nothing but an abyss for her. And she feels her right at that brink. There's nothing for her. "Yes, we wait for the stroke of doom," said Faramir. And they said no more. And it seemed to them, as they stood upon the wall, that the wind had died, and the light failed, and the sun was bleared, and all sounds in the city or in the lands about were hushed. Neither wind, nor voice, nor bird call, nor rustle of leaf, nor their own breath could be heard. The very beating of their hearts was stilled. Time halted. And as they stood so, their hands met and clasped, although they did not know it. And still they waited for they knew not what. Right? Then presently it seemed to them that above the ridges of the distant mountains, another vast mountain of darkness rose, towering up like a wave that should engulf the world, and about it lightnings flickered, and then a tremor ran through the earth, and they felt the walls of the city quiver. A sound like a sigh went up from all the lands about them, and their hearts beat suddenly again. "It reminds me of Númenor," said Faramir, and wondered to hear himself speak. That's an amazing detail. It just came out of him. "Of Númenor," said Erwin. Númenor, the old civilization, right, that disappeared. "Yes," said Faramir, "of the land of Westerness that foundered, and of the great dark wave climbing over the green lands and above the hills, and coming on, darkness unescapable. I often dream of it." "Then do you think that the darkness is coming?" said Erwin. "Darkness unescapable?" and suddenly she drew close to him. No, said Faramir, looking into her face. It was but a picture in the mind. I do not know what is happening. The reason of my waking mind tells me that great evil has befallen and we stand at the end of days. But my heart says nay, and all my limbs are light, and a hope and joy are come to me that no reason can deny. Eowyn, Eowyn, White Lady of Rohan, in this hour I do not believe that any darkness will endure. And he stooped and kissed her brow. Now, so now there's a kind of almost effortless togetherness that's brought, like her mind is still on Aragorn. So she is almost as if she doesn't notice what's happening here. Perhaps so great is her capacity to repress her own real emotions, but she's still stuck on the idea of Aragorn. He is very much immersed in her now. So a few days follow, and this is on page 964. And so this is the kind of the climactic romance of the book, right? So this one page. So they've traversed this from being like very distant to each other to this stage in about 3 pages, right? So then Faramir came and sought her, and once more they stood on the walls together, and he said to her, Erwin, why do you tarry here and do not go to the rejoicing in Cormalan beyond Caer Andros, where your brother awaits you? So the distant battle has been won, right? So why are you still here? And she said, do you not know? But he answered, 2 reasons there may be, but which is true, I do not know. And so this is kind of utterance I think only Faramir in the book makes this kind of utterance. He's got a lot going on. He's got a good analytical mind. He can say there are 2 reasons, right? So, and she said, I do not wish to play at riddles. Speak plainer. Then if you will have it so, lady, he said, you do not go because only your brother called for you. And to look on the Lord Aragorn, Elendil's heir, in his triumph would now bring you no joy. Or because, so you wouldn't be able to stand it to look on Aragorn, knowing that he didn't call for you, your brother called for you, right? So reason 1. Reason 2, or because I do not go, and you desire still to be near me. Now this is very daring on his part, because I do not go and you desire still to be near me. And maybe for both these reasons, and you yourself cannot choose between them. Eowyn, do you not love me? Or will you not? Right, that's interesting. Do you not love me, or will you not? I don't think I've ever made that distinction before. Right? Are you refusing to? I wished to be loved by another, she answered. I wished to be loved by another, she answered. So by Faramir, I'm thinking, what does that past tense mean? Right? I wished to be loved by another, she answered. But I desire no man's pity. And that but is very interesting. It's a pregnant but. So what is she saying? I don't want your pity. Right? I don't want you to be moved by my situation. I don't want you to love me because of that. I desire no man's pity.
Maybe we just add that it had been evident earlier at one point that he was pitying her greatly.
Right. He said so.
Right.
Yeah. That I know, he said. You desired to have the love of the Lord Aragorn, because he was high and puissant, and you wished to have renown and glory, and to be lifted far above the mean things that crawl on the earth. And as a great captain may to a young soldier, he seemed to you admirable. For so he is, a lord among men, the greatest that now is. But when he gave you only understanding and pity, then you desire to have nothing, unless a brave death in battle. Look at me, Erwin. Right, so this is the only time in the book someone is that direct. In other words, look at me, Erwin. Turn your damn head, look at me. So it suggests that she's trying not to look at him, right? I think that's what it's implying. Look at me, Erwin. And Erwin looked at Faramir long and steadily. Right? This is not a woman who's afraid of anything. And Faramir said, Do not scorn pity, that is the gift of a gentle heart, Erwin. But I do not offer you my pity, for you are a lady high and valiant, and have yourself won renown that shall not be forgotten. And you are a lady beautiful, I deem, beyond even the words of the elven tongue to tell. And I love you. Once I pitied your sorrow, but now were you sorrowless, without fear or any lack, were you the blissful queen of Gondor, still I would love you. Eowyn, do you not love me? Then the heart of Erwin changed. Or else at last she understood it. Right? That's a lot to unpack. And suddenly her winter passed and the sun shone on her. I stand in Minas Anor, the tower of the sun, she said, and behold, the shadow has departed. I will be a shield maiden no longer, nor vie with the great riders, nor take joy only in the songs of slaying. I will be a healer and love all things that grow and are not barren. And she looked at Faramir. No longer do I desire to be a queen, she said. Right? So this has happened like in half a page. This the transformation of Eoma. And so, okay, so for me, there's a lot at stake in this. And it's complex. And I think it hinges on the question of whether you find this convincing or not. Right? And maybe we can talk about it afterwards. So if I don't find it convincing, it's partly because it's too rushed. And I feel that in this half page that I've just read out, the wild thing in Erwin has just died. Right? And that she's been forced, or she's forcing herself into entering into this new relationship that she doesn't really feel. Notice she doesn't, when he says, and I love you, Erwin, do you not love me? She doesn't say, I love you. Right? So the restraint in her words is marked. So then, okay, so if it's not convincing, then in a way, Tolkien has kind of rushed her to fit into a trajectory where she can play the role that she's supposed to play socially, in which case the killing of her spirit, or the evaporation of her spirit, would be tremendously sad. In other words, that she has now been caught in a secondary net, in a trammel here. And so the heroic aspiration, this wild, noble, larger than life thing that made Erwin so magnificent in her greatest moment, you say, well, that's now diminished, and Tolkien has had to get rid of it in order for her to fit into the hierarchy of this novel. So that's not convincing. If it is convincing, right, then I say this is a remarkable passage, so I must say it feels convincing to me. And part of what makes it convincing is that it happens in so short a space, is that people in wartime situations or under siege or something, in those high pressure life or death situations, they always report that emotions go very quickly, that great emotions express themselves in very short amounts of time. And this would seem right in this passage, but it's not a sappy romantic passage, again, because she doesn't say I love you. She's not quite sure, and her heart hasn't caught up to her mind yet with this, but she's able. Something about Faramir has made it able for her to renounce, in a way, the barbaric, heroic ethos, right? So it's not, life isn't just about fighting anymore. In fact, she turns it back, and life isn't about fighting at all, right? Anymore. It's healing. So if this is right, then what Eowyn has done here, as if it's convincing, is that it's a kind of rejection. She's managed to reject the appeal of the heroic, the attraction of the heroic, and found a way to live. Right. So then it's huge. So this is somebody who has had the experience of heroic consummation. Right? She's the profound eros of the heroic she's had, And you might say it's part of the sad things that this is now a story that she will have to tell later on in life, but it's something she no longer participates in. But she's able to turn her back on that and live. I don't want. You had something to add?
No,
Yeah.
no, continue.
Yeah. So to pick up on the question of the heroic then that Mr. McCombs started us on, I find that in this last book, in Return of the King, Erwin for me, in the kind of successful version of this wooing, Erwin for me is the analog and contrast to Frodo. Now, so Frodo, the main character of the Lord of the Rings, I say at the end, and I'll just abbreviate this very, very quickly so that we can move on. That Frodo's plight at the end, he's wounded, and it seems to a superficial reading that he's dying of a wound, but several times he's implied that his wound is not material. It's not caused by is it the Barrowmen? Is it Barrow-wights? The Barrow-wights.
Right.
You stabbed early on in the novel.
Well, by the ring wraiths.
Yes, the ring wraiths. That's right, the ring wraiths. And it's a question about to what extent Frodo dies because of something like a physical wound, or does he die because of a psychic wound? That he doesn't want to live because he's lost the intensity of having been connected with the heroic story, and so he can't live without that. The fact that that's in the past, and he doesn't want to live because he doesn't want to live past his consummation, right? So here in this book, I find Tolkien is raising some profound questions about the place of the heroic in human life. Frodo can't live with that. He tells Sam is torn in two. Is 3 times Sam is described by Frodo as being torn in two, right? So Sam wants to follow his master. So he doesn't want to go back to domestic life, to a life in the Shire. Frodo tells him he has to, and Frodo is aware that Sam is torn between his need to be a grounded human being, to grow stuff, right? To have a family, to love, and his need for something heroic and transcendent, right? So Sam is torn, but Sam also manages to go back, right? Which to me is a mystery.
Mm-hmm. That's very good. I think I also find the passage convincing, but you're the one who taught me to worry about sex in the Lord of the Rings, so I was such a strange reader of it, I guess because I started when I was 11, that I hadn't ever worried about the fact that Tolkien doesn't handle those things well. But I think part of the reason it's so convincing, I'm obviously an admirer of Faramir, is that I think everything that Faramir says is right. He shows her that he understands her. And he also perhaps slightly criticizes her in order to nudge her in the right direction. So I think she does see him at his best. She sees that he's a man of understanding, that he has wisdom. And we also know that she knows that he's a good warrior as well. So he's not just a nerdy academic who doesn't know how to handle a sword. If I may, I'll say one other thing which is unconnected, and then you can pick up on either of them or neither. But I thought it struck me as you were reading when she said that I will be a healer, that even in doing that, she still is imitating Aragorn, because Aragorn healed her, right? But she chose the other half of him, not the heroic, kingly, noble part, but the gentler, more merciful, more pitying side.
Yeah, that's a great point.
So then there's a little bit of an irony when Faramir laughs merrily in response and says, "That is well, for I am not a king." So I can kind of hear Aragorn there in the king. Anyway, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, Faramir is so judicious. Like, he rarely takes a wrong step.
Right.
Yeah. It's his father who finds his judiciousness improbable, right? Like,
Right.
You're too good. You're too wise. You must be up to something.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and his father, of course, is a very clever, prudent, far-seeing man. So if that disturbs even the father Denethor, there must be something pretty uncanny about it. He also, I remember as I was looking through all the passages on Faramir in the book, there aren't really all that many, that when Sam gets angry at Faramir and stands up and gives him a talking to, Tolkien tells us that Faramir responds without anger. You know, like, if somebody speaks that way to me, I definitely get angry, but it seems he's judicious, and given that he's not warlike at all, he's willing not to worry about an insult.
Yeah, he doesn't stand on ceremony. You know, I keep thinking of Aragorn's first visit to, I think it was to Denethor, when the guard asks everyone to surrender their swords, and Aragorn gets
to Theoden,
to Theoden, right? That's right. And Aragorn gets into a chess bumping match with the guard, saying, "I'm not going to surrender. I do not surrender my sword." You know, and this goes on for about a page until Gandalf has to stop it. You know, it's like the adult coming in and saying, "Stop." You know, and it seems that Faramir is not a blowhard, and he's always adult.
Right.
Yeah. Tolkien said somewhere, by the way, that Faramir is the character in the book that he most identified with.
Oh, really?
Yeah. That it was most him.
That's funny.
Yeah.
I'm not sure whether Tolkien was as good as that.
Right. Anyway. Should we turn it over to questions now?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So you mentioned, kind of a lack of sex in Lord of the Rings, and I wondered what you make of this sort of what seems to be a repeated dynamic between the sexes, that it seems like they almost have to really give up something to be together. Like if you think of the Ents and the Entwives, well, they actually choose not to be together. The Entwives choose not to be together. Or if you think of Arwen, she has to give up, I guess mostly the females have to give up. Arwen has to give up her immortality and her call to go to the west with other elvenkind in order to be with Aragorn. And I guess maybe a counterpoint to that would be like Sam and Rosie. We don't know if Rosie has to give anything up to be with Sam, but this does seem to happen repeatedly.
And Eowyn.
Yes.
Barbaric heroism.
Yeah. What are you thinking when you asked that?
That, I don't know, it always just seems something so sad to me that the separation for Tolkien seemed it seemed to indicate that the separation between the sexes was very wide, and what they really wanted couldn't always be fulfilled together, such that to be together was to sacrifice something that they wanted, although they may also want to be together at times.
May I go? Rashly?
Go.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I'll point out that Eowyn gives something up and embraces something. Yeah. So it's not a pure or mere renunciation. And then you mentioned Sam and Rosie, and it seems important that they're the lowliest people in the book. So maybe if you have some people who have grand aspirations, it's hard for them to partner up with someone because that requires more sacrifice than maybe people with grand aspirations are willing or capable of making. So I know that there's a little bit of aspiration in Sam, but he's mostly pretty modest and down to earth and humble. And so it makes better sense that he can probably be happily married and maybe not require Rosie to give up anything or much in order to marry him. So my hunch at this point is that it's ambition, and then the women are the ones typically who have to give up something in Tolkien. Luthien, also in the Silmarillion, is in the same position as Erwin and has to give up and gives up immortality for Beren.
Do you think that also the men in leadership positions have also to give up something? They end up so one-dimensional. Maybe that only Faramir tries to have everything.
Mm-hmm.
One might say he's lucky, but Aragorn becomes one-dimensional, and he's sort of rather distant. He's a distant figure, right, to most of us, like adults are to small children.
Mm-hmm.
You can see that they're doing important things, but you can't understand why, right? So there's kind of flatness that comes with being important.
It's interesting. Yeah, I mean, Aragorn is obviously so much higher than Faramir, but there is some kind of flatness there. At least I can say in my experience, I don't admire him the way that I do Faramir. Just out of curiosity, does anybody else have a way of responding to this? You might need to take your mask off or speak louder.
I'm just thinking heroism versus hope. Seems like the women give up heroism and maybe in a way the men give up hope.
Certainly Aragorn did for 100 years or so, maybe.
Yeah, so Frodo gives up home, right, in order to go on the quest. Sam gives up home to go on the quest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's right. It's kind of striking that the Hobbit is not nearly as tragic on this point as the Lord of the Rings. So Bilbo goes on his adventure, and he's something heroic, and he comes home. And I think one of the last lines maybe of the Hobbit is that the kettle on his hearth sounded merrier to him or something like this because of his adventures. So he was somehow able to bring the adventures back and let them permeate his home life, but that doesn't really happen in Lord of the Rings. That's very nice.
With a fact that you weren't expecting. So Tom Bombadil and Goldberry have a perfectly lovely, mature romance. They both seem active, and we know they spend the night together. I don't see anyone giving up anything, at least at that level.
Do you find it convincing?
I absolutely do. It's not my favorite part of the book, but for all the information I have, I don't find it less convincing than a giant spider.
But Tom Bombadil is, I'm glad you brought him up, but he is a homebody, right? He has set very narrow limits, Gandalf says, and he won't go beyond them. So he doesn't have an aspiration to give up, maybe. It also might help that he's a god.
Or above a god.
Right. I assume he's one of the Ainur. Yeah.
Take a question.
Yes.
Okay. So the wild thing in Eowyn has died. Is that Tolkien
has asked to question that which we desire again and again throughout the books. Let me say that again, I'm sorry. So the wild thing in Erwin has died. Is it that Tolkien has asked a question that which we desire again and again throughout the books? Is that?
What is the thing I wonder that we desire again?
Yeah, I don't understand the question.
Try another question. So another question while we wait for the person to elaborate. What specifically from Faramir's declaration, what does he say that is so convincing as to make Erwin give up the very thing which has fueled all her actions thus far? Should I repeat?
No, that's what I understand. That's good.
Uh-huh,
Yeah.
uh-huh.
That was in the
Yeah, so okay, so the part that he says, what he says, so, and Erwin looked at Faramir long and steadily. And Faramir said, I'm hearing that, looked at him long and steadily, I'm hearing a long pause. He looked at him long and steadily, and Faramir said, do not scorn pity, that is the gift of a gentle heart, Erwin. But I do not offer you my pity. For you are a lady high and valiant, and have yourself won renown that shall not be forgotten. And you are a lady beautiful, I deem, beyond even the words of the elven tongue to tell. And I love you. Once I pitied your sorrow. Once I pitied your sorrow. But now, were you sorrowless, without fear or any lack? Were you the blissful queen of Gondor? Still I would love you. Eowyn, do you not love me? Then the heart of Erwin changed, or else at last she understood it. Before I venture something, do any of you have thoughts about this? What happened to that moment? Could you come and stand here? Thank you. And you can take off your mask.
Maybe something about the pity aspect, and how that, I'm thinking about how that's related to, you know, seeing someone else's suffering and feeling something from it and wanting to help in a healing sense rather than in a warlike sense. Yeah, but I'm not sure.
You mean it's not pity that is a form of condescension?
Yeah, it's
Right.
more closer
Yeah.
to compassion.
Yeah, yeah. So the pity that is from a gentle heart is the pity that in a way understands and sees another person and feels spontaneously with them. Yeah. So is it that he understands her? Is that what moves her? Is that that she's seen?
and maybe also not just understands, but admires,
Admires.
right?
Yeah.
You are a lady high and valiant, and have yourself won renown that shall not be forgotten. That's maybe that affirmation means as much to her as admittedly
Yeah.
the understanding, important
Yeah.
as it is, does.
Yeah. He sees her whole life, right?
Right.
Yeah. And that she says that even if you were unattainable to me as Queen of Gondor, and if you had no sorrow, and if you were completely triumphant, still I'd love you.
Right.
Yeah.
May I say something?
Yes.
I wonder if it's possible that
she has found a new model. So you said that she loves Aragorn because, and that might also be in part because he can be a model to her. And now he's shown that that he's somewhat like her. So he would love her even if she was the blissful Queen of Gondor. That's somewhat like her ardent love of Aragorn as king. So I think that she might be saying, well, I don't know, I don't necessarily need a model anymore. I can find someone who's more like me. So, I mean, we talk about Aragorn being distant, like a parent, and she is settled for someone less sublime. Settled or found someone more fitting for herself.
That she sees a new possibility, right? Both in life and for herself.
Yeah.
It is strange. I mean, I'm not sure what to make of that, Mr. McCombs. But it is interesting that the roles are reversed. I agree that he is expressing himself somewhat as she did in relation to Aragorn.
It frees her. Like Aragorn only cares about her outfit.
Right.
And so she has to maintain being real if she's going to maintain Aragorn in any capacity. And so she seems to have this new freedom now to be more authentically, more joyful with herself, and to, I don't know, maybe this is a regain for her.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. I think with Aragorn, she always feels lesser. Right? This is the shadow that Aragorn talks about, where she's always under his shadow. And she feels that.
What do we do with the fact that instead of saying, yes, I love you, or I will, she says, I'm going to be a healer. So she is indicating a change of heart, and it might be an indirect way. It certainly is an indirect way of encouraging Faramir. But did Faramir help her to become a healer? Did he help her to reject her excessive aspiration for heroism? Another possibility is she's saying, this is how I'm going to get over Aragorn. If I continue to care about high things, then I'll be stuck on Aragorn. I don't know. Seems right. By the way, Faramir often resorts to counterfactuals when he tries to persuade people of things. So he wouldn't take the ring even if he found it on the side of the road. And now when he's trying to convince Eowyn, he has another counterfactual.
What does that say about him?
I think it shows that he's a thinker.
Yeah.
That reality is not enough for him to say what he thinks. He has to imagine other possibilities to express himself.
Yeah. I mean, she's also an intellectual, right? She goes for the idea, and she's aware that she goes for the idea. Right?
Yeah, say more about that. Where do you see her going for
little
the
things
idea?
like, so like then the heart of Erwin changed, or else at last she understood it, right? So there's always a tension in Erwin between her heart at any given time and what she's thinking is happening.
Right.
And so one of the things, I think one of the reasons that we read at such length from Tolkien is so that you could see his delicacy as a writer, that he really is a subtle writer, and every word counts. But in this particular dialogue, I wonder what you see between Erwin and Faramir is a meeting of intelligence as they understand each other, as they try to figure out what their minds going on, their minds here, their intentions. So they're reading each other. They're trying to suss out each other's intentions, and behind that, a little bit like Faramir and Frodo's conversation earlier, and maybe Faramir brings that out in people.
Yeah, that's interesting. And she had some of it before. I mean, when she was with Wormtongue and Theoden, she knew what was going on when Theoden didn't. She was not deceived. maybe she was lucky with Mary, but perhaps we could also say she was discerning and made the right decision in bringing him along on the ride of the Rohirrim.
Right.
Yeah, that I hadn't thought of her as a thinker, but I like that. That I think makes sense. And that fits with her decision to become a healer too.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, she goes for ideas, right? The idea or something strikes her and grips her.
Right.
Yeah. Let's have another question. Mr. Vic, yeah.
He speaks of being the kind of individual who actually doesn't value, violence or warfare in any way, simply for the sake of it, but instead sees it as a necessity because he's facing what he perceives to be, and which within the book is an unstoppable force, right? A entity which is completely possessed by the desire to exert a total amount of power. And so I was just personally sort of interested in the idea or the notion of, if you were ever to actually have to face some kind of aggressor that was attempting to exercise that, like a total control, like a complete domination of yourself and of freedom itself, or at least your own freedom, or any scope or scale of freedom, where really is the, it's like, how do we avoid, almost like in the sort of Nietzschean sense of becoming the very monsters that we seek to destroy, or like, where do we draw the line? Is it simply, would it just simply be in that, the awareness that our own desire when it comes to the destruction of our enemies is not having anything to do with the robbing of freedom, but instead liberation? And would that be it? Or would there be anything else that's really necessary to consider?
Is there, it seems to me that there's a providence in the Lord of the Rings. So people who don't use evil means to overcome evil either get lucky or they're favored by a god or the gods. So for example, at one point Frodo says something, I haven't read this actually for a little while, but it was a pity that someone did not kill Gollum, and Gandalf replies, it was pity that stayed his hand. And then at some point, I think Gandalf says, my heart tells me that he has a heart to play in this story before it ends. And then of course it turns out that if Gollum had not been spared, then the ring would not have been destroyed. So it looks as, it would be good if there were an example in the Lord of the Rings of sort of turning the other cheek or not descending to the level of the enemy, and it works out for natural reasons and not because of luck or providence.
Well, I think you can kind of look at the elves and their call to the West as a sort of way of refuting the like violent means of we don't want to participate in this. We're just gonna go, if that makes sense.
Right.
Yeah.
So you could be they conveniently have a place to go.
Yeah, they're less threatened than the other races of Middle Earth because they have somewhere to go, and that gives them the opportunity to turn the other cheek. They're able to say, there is no reason for us to fight against Sauron and all the darkness that will consume Middle Earth, because we can just go to the Undying Lands.
But for those who don't have an escape, right, then in a way we're left with, I think Mr. Vic's quandary. So in a purely natural world with purely natural causation, it seems that the powerful enemy who's focused only on one thing, who's single-minded, is going to win. If you're interested in more than one thing, they're going to win, right? Because all their resources are put into this.
Mhm.
So with Faramir, I think in a way it can look like luck, that in the defeat of Sauron, somehow everything came together at the last moment, and by some miracle, it's the hobbits that are there, at the important juncture. So nobody could have predicted that, right? It's so one might say that okay, this book expresses a kind of faith,
Mhm.
right? But you also sense that it's very close. Could have gone the other way.
Mhm.
So Faramir, right? Maybe he's lucky so far, but he has a sense that sooner or later this is doomed, right? You can't maintain this rich civilization,
Right.
right? Corruption will win.
And I mean, and I did say something like this in my earlier first remarks, but the book is tragic. It is very sad, and the great things are lost.
There you go. Thank you.
That's really good. I like that. I might try to put the point in a moral register and see whether it still seems similar to what you were saying, that Sauron is so wicked that he can't transcend himself to imagine what others are like very well. But humble people, or people who aren't too big, are capable of imaginative sympathy with others or identification with others, and that, besides being a moral advantage, that might be a tactical advantage as well.
Yeah.
Does that?
Yeah, because Frodo can imagine being Sauron.
Right.
Right.
Right, but yeah, I mean, as you were saying, Sauron cannot imagine that anybody would try to destroy the ring. It's beyond his ken.
So the key factor is imagination.
Yeah, and maybe humility.
And humility, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But it seems you can't have imagination if you don't have humility, right? Because humility is what gets you. It's a precondition for seeing that anything is possible.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that other people, when other people are different, they might be right.
Yeah. Another question?
I'm actually curious about, let's see. So I'm curious about the defense of the city, and Mr. McCombs, you were beginning to talk about this, and you were talking about this in the beginning about the city being beautiful and wise, and that's why that's where the kind of reference for the defense of the city comes from. Okay. And the reason I'm curious is because in contrast to the healer, I think there are two different ways of maybe preserving the same thing, right? So you could say that like you defend the defense of the city is when something is coming towards you and you push back. You know, you don't take damage or whatever. Whereas a healer someone who does healing or is healing someone is something that takes damage and then from within or something akin to within is done to preserve or restore the thing. Or the city, whatever But I'm curious about like why defense is so important, right? Because a part of me really is like, oh no, healing, it's the best. But you can be conquered. There might not be the chance of healing. So there does seem some sort of necessity for defense. So I wonder just where does the balance come in, or really where does the necessity of defense? I don't know if that's the correct question, but I'm just curious about like the defense of the city. I hope that gives you enough area to maybe speak on something, or your heart is moved by it.
It seems, I mean, there's nuance in the question. Answering the easy part would be, if the enemy is strong and determined enough, you're going to be dead, not in a position to be healed. So you have to resist, you have to defend. But I think there are examples in The Lord of the Rings where there's not as much defense. Like when the hobbits returned to the Shire, Frodo is very eager to have as little violence as possible in the Shire. He's already sort of thinking about healing, not about fighting or defending themselves from the invaders.
But then he can do that because there already is defense.
Yeah, he doesn't have
He doesn't
other
have
people
to.
are doing
Yeah,
it.
right.
It's all, it's easy to talk that way when you don't have to fight.
That's a good question. Because I mean, think of the various ways that one could take that question. So one might say, well, why do we need defense? Well, it's a nasty necessity, right? So it's dirty business that has to get done. And so then you'd have a bunch of people who are really good at kind of special ops or dirty fighting and don't care what they do as long as they keep as long as they defend, right? So these are people who, in one scenario, they're willing to fight dirty, they're willing to do whatever is necessary to safeguard their civilization. But you might say that scenario would be at the cost of their humanity, right? Whereas what we see here with the warriors of Gondor and the others on the good side is that it's not only, so the necessity of defense is not only for the utilitarian reason of preventing the overthrow of the city, but it's also a kind of ethical consummation for a certain type of person, right? So the warrior who goes out and the warriors who lay their lives on the line, right? Who confront the enemy, who confront stronger enemies. There's something in that makes a certain kind of person feel more alive. The exercise of courage, of self-sacrifice, of camaraderie, right, with other people who are doing it. The love of fighting, right? There are people who are more alive when they do that.
I just want to add, actually, because it reminds me about what you were saying, Mr. Venkatesh, about the ring and how Frodo feels more alive, and that the ring is something that, what you had mentioned, Mr. McCombs, is that you can't do good with the ring. There isn't goodness because it's made by the Dark Lord. I wonder if this defense, this kind of dirty business that needs to get done, is something similar to that feeling that you get with the ring, that there is this kind of darkness that is present in defense and in offense, but in some way it brings life in its darkness, in its evilness, in its killing. There is life that is invigorated.
I think there's, yeah, I think, I mean, I like what y'all are both saying, and I think there's maybe one really notable example of someone more alive in last night about Faramir. Frodo thinks that Faramir has trapped him and accuses him of trapping him in a lie. And Faramir says, I wouldn't trap even an orc. I wouldn't snare even an orc in a lie. And orcs are the people in the Lord of the Rings that you can kill without, in good conscience. You don't have to worry about it at all. So this involves orc slaying, but Gimli really enjoys killing orcs. And he counts how many he kills, and he and Legolas get into a competition about it. And you might think, okay, that's appalling, but as you're reading it, I don't think I'm a heartless bastard. But as I read that, I'm not appalled. I think, okay, yeah, he relishes fighting those orcs.
Mm. Hemingway wrote a book about bullfighting called Death in the Afternoon, and it's a non-fiction book about bullfighters. You should read it. I think it may be his best book. But he's looking at different types of bullfighters and their personalities. One of the things that he said that's stuck in my mind is that there's a kind of bullfighter who loves the art, right? So for that bullfighter, it's the technical prowess. It's this thing that he's practiced, almost like a ballet, that he knows what to do, and there's the beauty of the art as he does it. But then perhaps the superior kind of bullfighter is the one who has all that, but also loves to kill. Right? The one who enjoys the kill. And so I wonder if those are two kinds of warriors, right? But one can imagine that it's important to have the second, right? Because the job could not be nourishing if you didn't love the kill. Yikes, right? I mean, let's say not just anyone, but killing enemies, so.
I think there's a kind of selfishness or self-prioritization always in this killing, but holds with the ring and in the defense of the Shire, all of it. And maybe the difference is something like the prioritization of others within self-prioritization is more nourishing. Like the defense of the Shire is more nourishing because it's not just about a selfishly driven individual, a desire not to die yourself.
Mm-hmm.
But in that, there's a kind of barrier. There's definitely a sharp divide that has to be made between the self and the end. But it can be made either strictly for the self in an evil way, as with the ring, or in a good.
Right. Yeah, that seems powerful because it's easy, I think, well, it's easy for me, probably for most of us, to imagine a situation where if someone was attempting to kill an innocent person whom I loved, it would seem very wrong not to do what I could to defend the innocent loved one. And I suppose that's sort of the way. That might be too extreme, but that's along the same lines that you're saying. If you're fighting to defend someone else and not yourself, who's innocent or whom you love or is worthy, then maybe you don't want to say, yeah, I wouldn't want to say yikes to that.
Like Alyssa and Gimli start counting after Pippin and Merry are captured by orcs, right?
Right. And what are you thinking about that?
So like, I realize that they aren't actually named when they're counting, but it is somewhat like punishing the person who threatened the life of the person.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's the killing in defense of someone you love or something you love, so killing out of love. But then, so there's some people who can do that, but might feel sick at having had to do that, right?
Yeah.
But then there are other people who might do that and feel satisfaction.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Oh yeah, we'll take that and that and that, right? So I think would be right to say that if somebody did it for the sake of the satisfaction, then there would be a kind of like profound egocentricity about this action, if it's for the sake of the satisfaction. Right, and that would be killing as a form of addiction, maybe.
Well, I think that there are probably, there's waiting behind your walls and healing and defending yourself at the walls. And I honestly think that Professor Tolkien and my great, which is the story of evil was coming to your house anyway. And if you didn't go out and solve it actively, not just defensively, but sought it out, then it was going to be there in force, and you wouldn't have been able to hold it back. So they solved the Sauron problem, and Saruman slipped in the back doors just to inflict, his sad revenge. So I think Tolkien would say that, or anyway, that's the way I felt at the end of the movies, that, they, just like when I was young, Vietnam veterans came back and they sat quietly and couldn't tell their stories, which is exactly what happens in the Peter Jackson movie. Merry and Pippin at the end of Return of the King ride around for years in their armor, being lauded by hobbits. So I think that there's probably a step further that Tolkien would have gone, that, you not only have to defend yourself, but you have to actively seek out evil, because it's coming.
Right, that's a very fair point. Obviously, the allies of the West do take the battle to the enemy, and they try to destroy Sauron at home, at his own home. And if they didn't do that, they were going to lose.
Yeah, they have to, because the enemy has contaminated the home already, has desecrated the home. Let's get another question.
Okay. Do you think Eowyn wanted to escape the cage of her sex to be a warrior, or escape the cage of her culture to join the high men of Numenor, or both? Perhaps her attraction to Aragorn and later Faramir can be explained by this.
Both, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
She doesn't go so far as to make a caustic critique of her own culture and say it's not right that women aren't allowed to fight, but she does seem to feel that it's unjust that she's not allowed to also. And she might wish, given that she can't fight, it does seem she would have preferred to be a man.
Preferred to be a man or preferred to be a fighter?
I'm just talking irresponsibly. But I think she wants to fight so badly that she would do it in either way. She would prefer to fight as she is, but she might like the hypothetical, if I were a man, if that's the only way she could pursue glory.
She doesn't seem to want the conventional woman's life, right? She doesn't doesn't seem to want to have kids, for example.
Mhm.
It doesn't seem to be tied to glory either, because for at least a period of time, she is, having killed the Witch King, she's fulfilled the prophecy and killed the greatest villain anyone's ever killed. So why does she want to get back on the horse and ride away? Go back to the battle.
And I think Faramir tries to express that, right? You've done it all.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Right.
So somehow she wants the fight, not the glory.
Yeah, so even if she'd done it, and even if nobody had seen it, that would have been satisfying for her.
I don't know how much is just her being sort of disgusted at how you sort of trapped in a place where you can't control them, you just have to wait for June to come with that. Whether that was in Damon's Hall or in the next.
So maybe are you elaborating on the idea that she's in a cage, that she's
Yeah.
in a hutch and trammeled?
Sort of having to watch in battle or just waiting for death to come to you.
She seems to be waiting, right, in those conversations, looking for an opening, looking for something that she hasn't thought of yet. Because she herself can't resolve what's happening to her. She doesn't see a way out. So then it has to be Faramir with his complex persuasive skills, right? Who can speak to that. Yeah. Yeah. Shall we take one more question?
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah.
I have one more. So I have a question about your sense of tragic, Mr. McCombs the elder. Do you feel? I feel like there are tragic elements, but the heroes do sail off into the sunset, and Sam gets to go home and have a happy life, and I feel like Arwen's mortality is probably tragic, but I'd like to think that the growth of the Malorn tree is a symbol for transfiguration or something not tragic.
Yeah, it's not perfectly accurate to say that it's tragic. Your formulation that there are tragic elements is more modest and cautious and more correct. I think the good guys win, and many of them are happy, but we know that many great and beautiful things are going away. The high elves are sailing over the sea, so much beauty and wisdom will be lost. And Gandalf is leaving. And in general, the third age is going to be the age of men. So the non-human races will diminish. And I find all of that, and Frodo can't enjoy the victory and has to sail away. So I find the end bittersweet. I find it rather sad, but somehow in a pleasing way. And that's why I want to call it tragic, but that's probably an inaccurate use of the word.
Oh, no, I agree with all that. That's, I hadn't quite thought of Gandalf and magic. Leaving. I didn't add that to my equation. No, I agree with you.
Yeah, although I do wonder if tragic is the right word. It's not quite like Greek tragedy or Shakespearean tragedy, right? That it's not something that the hero brings on himself, but elegiac, like a kind of elegy for like it's gone. What everything good that we've seen is gone, right? And it seems that someone like Aragorn and Faramir, their ceremonial instinct, right? The way that you first see in how in Boromir's funeral, right? When Gimli, Legolas, and Aragorn give Boromir, who's rather dislikable character, right? Give Boromir this beautiful funeral that is full of ceremony, and they seem to improvise it without words, as if so they all of them have an instinct for this ceremony, and then they send Boromir's body down the river on a boat into the golden haze, right? And the beauty of that, you see, seems to express like all the instances of ceremony that we see Aragorn participating, and it's as if he's like with a funeral, that the ceremony is to commemorate something that's gone, and to elevate something that's gone, to give it a beautiful picture at the end, so that when you have the crowning at the end of the book, you have another improvised ceremony. Nobody quite remembers what to do, but in this situation is unique. So they make up something, right? Faramir, Aragorn, and the others. And it's beautiful. And so it seems that the whole kind of ceremonial aspect of the book's heroism, it's as if that takes for granted that it's all gone. Right? It's going to go. There's going to be an age where it's all gone. So it's gone already. So let's treat it like it's gone already, with great respect and dignity, because you'll never see it again once it's gone, right? And I think that for me, that kind of that beauty, the commemoration of the beauty before it's passed, carries with it like great sadness, because the passing of the beauty is already there in the present.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's spot on. And if I remember right, in Tolkien's essay on Beowulf, one of his main tasks is to figure out what is this? What's the genre? And I think he had two adjectives, but one of them was elegiac, which is kind of striking. So he might have had that on his mind, actually.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you.
That was
Yeah, thank you. Go reread. This is good. Thank you.